Our house was a palace, sure, but a cold and echoing one. Marble floors, fancy furniture that looked like it belonged on TV, not under my feet, that was my life. Dad, Richard the Great they called him at his construction company, built it all from scratch. He loved me to pieces, his only kid, but seeing him was like catching a glimpse of a shooting star, there and gone too fast. Gotta chase that next project, kiddo, he'd say with a wink, his booming voice the only warmth in the giant house. My mom, Isabella, well, she was the ice queen on a frozen throne. 18 years younger than Dad, she had cheekbones sharper than a diamond and a closet bigger than my entire room, overflowing with clothes that sparkled like disco balls. Her days were a whirlwind of fancy salons with French names I couldn't pronounce, massages that cost more than my bike, and gossip sessions with her friends who looked like they were all carved from the same mold. The only time Mom ever seemed to remember I existed was when she needed someone to boss around. "Those jeans are a mess, honey," she'd sneer, her voice dripping with fake sugar. "Haven't I taught you how to keep things tidy?" Funny thing was, the house was spotless, thanks to a whole army of maids who scurried around like silent mice. But if I dared to sit down and watch cartoons after school, here she'd come, faster than a cheetah after lunch. "Shouldn't you be learning something useful, Lily?" she'd snap, her perfectly painted nails tapping a sharp rhythm on the counter. "Like how to clean these floors properly before you ruin them?" Useful? Cleaning floors? I looked at Dad, who was just coming through the door, grass stains on his jeans and a smile on his face. He'd been playing catch with the neighborhood kids again. "Leave her alone, Isabella," he'd rumble, his voice warm and deep. "She's got plenty of time for chores later. How about some ice cream sundaes, champ?" My treat. Dad was my hero, my best friend. He'd wrestle with me on the floor, his booming laugh filling the house, a stark contrast to Mom's constant complaints. He taught me how to throw a perfect spiral, how to fix a leaky faucet, and most importantly, how to be kind, even when the world felt cold and empty, just like this giant house. The year I turned 15 was supposed to be different. Driver's ed, maybe a summer job at the ice cream shop down the street, all the normal teenage stuff. Instead, it became the year everything went sideways, faster than a roller coaster gone rogue. It started with a cough. A nagging, wet cough that wouldn't quit. Dad, who could usually shake off a cold in a day, just kept getting worse. His booming laugh faded into a raspy wheeze, his once strong hands grew thin and trembled slightly when he held mine. Doctors became a constant presence in our house. Stern-faced men and women who spoke in hushed tones that sent chills down my spine. A cruel diagnosis, laryngeal cancer. Dad, ever the optimist, kept a brave face. "Just a little bug," he'd say, his voice weak but his eyes full of the same warmth I knew and loved. "Nothing a few trips to the doc can't fix." Those trips turned into hospital stays, harsh treatments that left him drained and pale. The vibrant man who could build a skyscraper from the ground up was reduced to a frail shadow, his once booming voice barely a whisper. I spent every spare minute by his bedside, holding his hand, reading him stories, praying for a miracle. "Don't worry, champ," he'd rasp, his eyes filled with concern. "I'm gonna be all right. You're gonna be all right." Worry? I was drowning in it. The thought of a world without Dad's booming laugh, his rough but comforting hugs, was unbearable. Mom, however, remained a constant source of irritation. While Dad fought for his life, she continued her self-absorbed routine. "Honestly, Richard," she'd complain, her voice clipped and cold, "you're giving me a headache with all this coughing. Maybe you should just sleep in the guest room, it's keeping me awake." One thing I did notice, though, was a subtle shift in her appearance. Maybe it was just me, but her designer clothes seemed to fit a little tighter, her perfectly flat stomach developing a slight bulge. It was a bizarre contrast to Dad's worsening condition, a small, unsettling detail amidst the storm. Then came the day, a seemingly ordinary Tuesday. Mom was on her way out, a fresh manicure appointment awaiting her. "Don't forget the black polish, darling," she called back from the doorway. "Black always goes best with mourning." Mourning? What was she talking about? Before I could question it, the phone rang. Mom answered, her voice dripping with fake concern. A few moments later, she hung up, her face a mask. "Well," she sighed, a strange, almost satisfied glint in her eyes. "Looks like today needs to be a black manicure after all." My heart hammered in my chest. A cold dread wrapped its icy fingers around me. What do you mean?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. Mom's mask slipped for a fleeting moment, a flicker of something cold and calculating crossing her face before it was replaced by a perfectly practiced frown. "Just some unfortunate news, Lily," she said, her voice back to its usual icy tone. "Looks like you'll be needing a strong woman to take care of you now." The days that followed were a blur of black crepe and forced smiles. The funeral home transformed our living room into a sterile, flower-filled showroom. Mom, ever the drama queen, reveled in the attention. Black lace or sweetheart neckline? She agonized, parading a seemingly endless stream of dresses in front of the mirror. Her friend, a woman with bleached blonde hair and a permanent pout, cooed in approval. "Oh darling, the sweetheart neckline. So Audrey Hepburn at her husband's funeral. Absolutely tragic and chic. Don't you think it's a little excessive?" I ventured, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom's eyes narrowed. "Excessive? Honey, this is for your father. We need to show his friends and family how much we respected him." Respected? The word tasted like ash in my mouth. "By showing off your cleavage?" The air crackled with tension. Mom's perfectly painted smile faltered for a second, replaced by a flash of something cold and dangerous. "You watch your tone, young lady," she hissed, her voice low and menacing. "These are adult matters you wouldn't understand." The adult matters turned out to be endless phone calls with florists and caterers, each conversation punctuated by Mom's theatrical sighs and demands for the absolute best. My grandparents, bless their hearts, tried to shield me from the worst of it, but the strained silences and worried glances spoke volumes. The funeral itself was a performance. Mom, draped in a ridiculously elaborate black dress that clung to her curves like a second skin, played the grieving widow to the hilt. Tears streamed down her perfectly made-up face as she clung to the arms of various concerned-looking relatives. Later that night, as I scrolled through social media in a daze, a familiar face popped up on my feed. There she was, Mom, in all her tragic and chic glory, the funeral photo plastered across her Instagram page. The caption, dripping with saccharine sentiment, spoke of her undying love and devotion to my father. "The love of my life, gone too soon," it read. A week had crawled by since Dad's funeral, each day a heavy weight on my chest. Mom, however, seemed to thrive in the silence. The endless parade of black dresses was replaced by a return to her usual flamboyant wardrobe, her smile a little too bright, her eyes a little too cold. One evening, as I trudged up the stairs after another day of forced pleasantries at school, the sound of unfamiliar laughter filtered through the air. I froze, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. The living room door was ajar, light spilling out into the hallway. Taking a deep breath, I peeked inside. There, sprawled on our plush sofa, was a young man who looked like he'd stepped off the cover of a fitness magazine. He was all tanned skin, perfect teeth, and designer stubble. Mom, perched beside him like a preening peacock, was batting her eyelashes with a practiced innocence I hadn't seen since I was a toddler. "Lily," she purred, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "This is Michael, my fiancé." "Fiancé?" I repeated, my voice barely a croak. Mom's smile faltered for a brief moment, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face before it was replaced by a too bright cheer. "Yes, darling. Isn't that wonderful? Michael is going to be living with us now." Michael, who hadn't even acknowledged my existence until now, finally grunted a greeting. Before I could process this latest absurdity, Mom continued, her voice taking on a patronizing tone. "And guess what else, honey bunch? We're expecting." Expecting? My mind reeled. Not only did she have a new husband-to-be a week after Dad's funeral, but she was also pregnant? It was all too much to take in. "What about Dad?" I stammered, the words catching in my throat. Isn't this a little? A little what? Mom snapped, her mask of cheer slipping for a moment. A little inconvenient? Don't be ridiculous. Life goes on, darling. And besides, she leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Michael here makes me truly happy. Something your father, bless his soul, was never quite capable of. Fury, hot and raw, bubbled up inside me. You never loved him, did you? I spat, my voice shaking with rage. You cheated on him. Mom's eyes narrowed. The smile was completely gone now, replaced by a steely glint. Perhaps, she admitted with a cold laugh. But that's none of your concern, is it? Now, from now on, you'll do as Michael and I say. You'll help with the housework, of course, and then you'll be a wonderful nanny to your new sibling. Over my dead body, I choked out, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. Don't get sassy with me, young lady, Mom hissed, her voice low and dangerous. This is my house, and you'll do what I tell you, or you'll get out. The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I straightened my spine, a newfound resolve hardening my voice. I wouldn't stay under the same roof with you for another minute even if you begged me, I declared, my gaze unwavering. You may have gotten rid of Dad, but you won't control me. Mom's face contorted in fury. Get out then, she shrieked, lunging towards me. She grabbed me by the shoulders and pushed me out the door. And don't come crawling back when you have nowhere else to go, she bellowed after me. I didn't answer. The front door slammed shut behind me with a satisfying thud. Snow swirled around the streetlights, casting an eerie glow on the deserted sidewalk. I was in my school clothes and sneakers, completely unprepared for the winter chill. But the sting of the cold was nothing compared to the burning betrayal in my heart. Looking down at my flimsy clothes, I spotted the abandoned garage across the street. Dad used to keep his old tools and some winter gear there. Maybe, just maybe, there was something I could use to keep warm for the short walk. The garage was a treasure trove of forgotten memories. In the back corner, under a dusty tarp, I spotted a familiar shape, Dad's old hunting jacket. It was worn and faded, but the thick leather promised some protection from the biting wind. With shaking hands, I dialed a taxi, my teeth chattering uncontrollably. The wait seemed to stretch on forever, each passing minute a small eternity. Finally, the headlights pierced the darkness, a beacon of hope in the cold night. My grandparents' porch light cast a warm glow as I stepped out of the taxi. Tears welled up in my eyes again, this time a mix of relief and sorrow. My grandma opened the door before I could even knock, her face etched with worry. Lily? What on earth? Her voice trailed off as she took in my appearance. Honey, you're freezing. Come in, come in. She ushered me inside, wrapping a thick blanket around my shoulders. Grandpa was right behind her, his face grim as he took in my tear-streaked cheeks and the oversized jacket. What happened, sweetheart? He asked, his voice gruff, but full of concern. I took a shaky breath, the warmth of the house slowly seeping into my bones. Then, in a torrent of words, I poured out everything, Mom's cold behavior after Dad's death, the fiancé, the pregnancy, and finally, the cruel revelation. My voice cracked as I spoke, the raw pain and betrayal spilling out into the room. By the time I finished, I was sobbing uncontrollably, my body racked with hurt. Grandma held me tight, her silence a comforting presence. Grandpa, after a moment, cleared his throat. There's something you should know, Lily, he began, his voice low and serious. Before your father passed away. He paused, his gaze flickering to Grandma before continuing. He knew all about her cheating and pregnancy, and well. He hesitated, then met my eyes. He had a lawyer come in and change his will. My heart skipped a beat. Change his will? Yes, Grandma chimed in, taking my hand. You see, honey, your father loved you more than anything in the world. It means that you are the sole heir to your father's estate. My jaw dropped. Everything? Everything, Grandma confirmed with a sad smile. But because of your age, you can't fully access the money until you graduate from college. Until then, a legal guardian needs to manage it. Not Mom, I blurted out before he could finish. The thought of her controlling Dad's money meant for me, was unbearable. Grandpa and Grandma exchanged a knowing look. Of course not, Grandma said, her voice firm. That's why we need to talk about custody. But to take you away from your mother, we need proof of her unsuitability. Proof? I reached for my phone, a mischievous glint entering my eyes. I have plenty of that. Over the past year, in a misguided attempt to protect myself, I'd started recording some of my arguments with Mom. The last conversation, the one where she kicked me out, was there in all its ugly glory. With trembling fingers, I played it back for my grandparents. The sound of my mother's cruel words filled the room, each sentence a fresh blow. By the time the recording ended, a tense silence hung heavy in the air. Then Grandpa cleared his throat. This is more than enough, Lily. We'll get you a lawyer, first thing tomorrow. You won't be going back to that house. Relief washed over me, warm and welcome. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about safety, about being in a place where I was loved and valued. A week had crawled by since the blow-up with Mom. One sunny and cold afternoon, as I was helping Grandma cook a pie, a loud, insistent pounding shattered the quiet. I froze, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. Grandma straightened up, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. That sounds like trouble, she muttered, brushing her hands off the flour. Before we could even exchange another word, the front door swung open with a bang, revealing a sight that made my blood run cold. Mom stood there, her face flushed with anger and desperation. Her hair was a mess, her clothes looked like they'd been slept in, and her eyes held a manic glint that sent shivers down my spine. There you are, she shrieked, her voice laced with a barely contained fury. You little ingrate. How could you do this to me? Grandma stepped forward, her voice firm but unwavering. Lily doesn't have to do anything, dear. She's here of her own free will. Mom scoffed, her gaze darting around the room before landing on me. Free will? Don't be ridiculous. You've filled her head with lies about me. Lies? I echoed, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. You're the one who lied, Mom. You lied to Dad, you lied to me, and now you have the nerve to play the victim? You never loved me and Dad. Mom's face contorted in fury. Don't you dare talk about your father like that. And love? You think that dusty old man was capable of love? He was boring, Lily. A drag. I deserved more. Her words hung heavy in the air, a cruel and selfish justification for her actions. My fists clenched at my sides, the anger bubbling inside me threatening to boil over. So you married him for money, then cheated on him while he was still alive? I spat, my voice dripping with disgust. And now you're angry because you're not going to get your claws into his inheritance? Mom's face turned ashen, her bravado crumbling under the weight of my words. Look, she said, her voice cracking with desperation. I know I messed up. But can't we just forget all that? I found out about the new will, Lily. You have everything now. You can help me, can't you? I'm pregnant, for crying out loud. I have nowhere to go. Her words hung heavy in the air, a desperate plea for a lifeline. A part of me, a tiny, insignificant part, flickered with a misplaced sense of pity. But then I remembered the countless nights I'd spent alone. Those were your choices, Mom, I said, my voice devoid of sympathy. And now you have to face the consequences. 2 months flew by in a whirlwind of activity. Lawyers, court dates, social worker visits, it felt like my life had become a legal drama. Mom, unsurprisingly, contested the custody hearing tooth and nail. The courtroom was a tense battleground. Mom, dressed in a cheap-looking suit and overly dramatic makeup, sat across from me, a picture of fake concern. Your Honor, she began, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. I am Lily's mother. I love her dearly, and I'm her only living parent. Taking her away from me would be a travesty. Her words were like nails on a chalkboard, a stark contrast to the cruel reality I knew. My lawyer, a sharp woman with a steely gaze, wasted no time in presenting her case. The recordings I'd made played on a small speaker in the courtroom, each snipped conversation a damning indictment of Mom's character. Her voice, dripping with contempt and frustration, filled the room, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. Then came the final blow, the recording of the night she kicked me out. The raw fear and confusion in my voice, the chilling indifference in hers, painted a picture 1,000 words couldn't express. As the last recording ended, a heavy silence descended upon the courtroom. Even the judge, a stern but fair-looking woman, seemed taken aback. Looking directly at Mom, I took a deep breath and spoke, my voice surprisingly steady. "Your Honor," I said. "Does this sound like the voice of a loving mother? Does this sound like someone who deserves to raise a child?" Mom opened her mouth to retort, but the judge held up a hand, silencing her. "The evidence presented is compelling," she said, her voice firm. "The recordings paint a clear picture of a dysfunctional and emotionally abusive relationship. Mrs. Miller," she addressed my mother directly, "your behavior towards your daughter has been documented and deemed unacceptable. Therefore, this court grants full custody of Lily to her grandparents, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson." A wave of relief washed over me, so intense it felt like I could breathe again for the first time in months. Grandma reached out and squeezed my hand, her eyes filled with unshed tears. Grandpa, ever stoic, offered me a gruff but genuine smile. A few days later, we stood outside the house I'd once called home. The eviction notice, a cold formality, felt like a badge of honor. Mom and her now fuming boyfriend were huddled by the door, their faces a mixture of anger and desperation. "Lily, honey, please," Mom whined, her voice laced with desperation. "Can't we just talk about this? I know I messed up, but I'm your mother. And I'm pregnant. We have nowhere to go." She gestured dramatically to her noticeably swollen belly, a desperate attempt to tug at my heartstrings. But this time it didn't work. "You had your chance, Mom," I said, my voice firm. "You made your choices, and now you have to face the consequences. Besides," I added, "you have Dad's savings, enough for a decent apartment and a comfortable life for you and your new family." The mention of the money hit a nerve. Mom's face contorted in fury, but this time, it was laced with a hint of fear. "You wouldn't dare cut me off," she hissed, her voice brittle. "I don't have to," I replied coolly. "You'll have access to a monthly stipend, enough to cover your basic needs. But that's all. Consider it my charity." Mom opened her mouth to argue, but the look in my eyes must have stopped her. With a final glare in my direction, she stormed off, her boyfriend trailing behind like a kicked puppy. 5 years had melted away like summer snow. Graduation from high school was a bittersweet affair, a celebration of achievement tinged with the pang of leaving a familiar chapter behind. Now, with a brimming acceptance letter in hand, I stood on the precipice of a new adventure, college. The University of Economics loomed ahead, a bustling hive of knowledge and ambition. Grandma fussed over my dorm room, insisting on rearranging the furniture for maximum efficiency. Grandpa, ever the pragmatist, helped me set up my laptop and internet connection, muttering about the outrageous cost of higher education. "Don't worry, Grandpa," I said, giving him a hug. "I'll make the most of it. This is Dad's company I'll be running someday, remember?" He squeezed me back, his gruff voice softening. "That's my girl. Your father would be proud." The mention of Dad always brought a lump to my throat. These past years had been a constant dance between grief and gratitude. Grief for the father I barely had the chance to know, and gratitude for the loving grandparents who had stepped up when I needed them most. College life was a whirlwind of lectures, study groups, and caffeine-fueled all-nighters. It wasn't easy, but I threw myself into it with a fervor that surprised even myself. News about Mom trickled in occasionally, delivered in hushed tones by well-meaning family friends. Apparently, she'd given birth to a stillborn child, a tragedy that had only deepened the chasm between her and the world. Her boyfriend, the one who'd abandoned ship when the comfortable life in a luxurious house evaporated, was nowhere to be seen. Honestly, none of it fazed me. The woman who had borne me was a stranger, a ghost from a past life. I had no room for negativity in my life, not when I was busy building a future where hard work and determination were the cornerstones of success.